First question here actually is from my normal co-host and producer of the show, Will, who is behind the curtain as the Wizard of Oz today. He's had a concern that the identity of NBA Finals teams in just this season between the Thunder and the Pacers means that teams are basically screwed if their best player is past their rookie scale extension. Jokic has started his Supermax. Jamal is about to start his veteran max contract as well. So first question is Denver just screwed because their best guys are already on their veteran max contracts and they can't go 11 deep like the Thunder and the Pacers can?
I don't think they're simply just screwed, but it makes things really hard when you have multiple guys that are overpaid by a pretty significant amount. And so I think for both Porter and Murray, I think they're probably both about like $10 million overpaid over what they should be. And then you take into account a guy like Zeke, who you wrote about recently, and he's
heard extensively about it.
Right. And he's making, $6 million more than he should be. And so you just start stacking problems.
Yeah. It's one thing, I think every roster has guys that are overpaid. Every roster, even like teams that are, that have very expensive rosters. They have a couple of guys that are overpaid, but like you said, the stacking of it, especially for a team that's sort of playing on these margins as they try to build a roster, is just like, man, if even one of these things was different, there's so much more that we'd be able to do in building out the roster around these guys. If any one of these contracts was like to the value that the player is bringing to the team.
Right. And so I think it's when you start stacking so many of them on top of each other, that's when it starts to become a real issue. And that's when you do get kind of screwed. And so, it's part of what I pointed out in my report is that usually when you have contracts like that, you can attach some picks and you can get a player that's either making more like what they should or a better player overall. But the problem is that this front office was investing those picks into young players instead of getting proven products. And that's part of what I talked about is that strategy, you need to be hitting on your first round picks every single year, and they need to be contributing pretty much right away. And the fact of the matter is that just didn't happen. And so are the Nuggets screwed? I would say no. And especially not because, not all their guys are on rookie scale contracts. Does that make life easier? Yes, it does. Yeah. But I think
when you're the Thunder and you have $30 million in cap space that you can just throw at Isaiah Hartenstein in free agency, I think that makes your life a little bit easier. Yeah. But
there's a lot of different ways to build a roster though. And, I think they can figure out a good way to do it. Does it look different than what the Thunder are doing? Yes, of course. But that's not to say it's wrong or that it can't work.
Next question from Neck Hoops on Twitter, who asks a related question. Why are they comparing the Pacers and OKC roster building to Denver? Denver is 3 years ahead of them and can't go back. They wanted chips so people got paid. I mean, that's just what happened. Neck is totally right there. He also says once OKC second and third best players get paid, their roster won't look nearly as good or deep. I agree with that. And they won't be able to pay a guy like Caruso $18 million a year to come off the bench. I will say by the time you get there, you will be paying bench players $18 million a year, but it'll be a smaller portion of the cap by then. You're totally on track with that as well. I do think there's something to, in terms of like a league-wide trend, NBA stars being better, younger. Like, you just don't tend to see a guy like Tyrese Halliburton being as good as he is at 23 years old, playing at an MVP caliber in the NBA playoffs to help get his team to the finals. So I don't necessarily buy into the logic that it's just about depth. Like, I think that the fact that SGA and Halliburton in the playoffs has been playing at an MVP caliber, just in a different way than SGA, like it's the playmaking. And the other thing is that I think talent is so high in the league right now that you just have so many awesome role players that the teams that can afford the best role players are going to look super deep, right? But that also means that if your best guy on your team is having a slightly off game or series, you can still survive that. Whereas in the past, that wasn't the case because the gap between not just the best players in the league. And then like the next tier of guys was massive, you know, when it was like LeBron, Steph versus like, you know, whoever else under them. Jake's guide, his Nuggets offseason guide, included these mock off seasons, and some of them included breaking up the core, and some of them included, you know, especially to get like salary balance. But some of them are also about, you know, targeting to get some specific guys that can help sort of along the edges of this team. Preface this discussion by saying Josh Kroenke isn't letting go of the core. I don't think that he's going to do anything with our top 4 players right now without giving them another chance to run it back one more time. I'm skeptical of this plan if the quote unquote support that they're going to put around these guys is all about the internal development of these players. I thought that this last season should have been the one where they get that support, and we call it this last dance. I want to center our discussion around the mock off seasons that do involve trading one of the core, because I want to show what that would look like. I think there are 3 different levels of trades that are being proposed across Nuggets fandom. There are trades that are targeting a specific player or archetype of player needed to fill the roster. I think that's something that they did when they went after KCP. Another type of trade is just trying to create a certain kind of salary balance with the roster. For example, you're trying to sell off MPJ for parts. The priority isn't necessarily who comes back, as long as they're playable. The last category of trade that I've got here is what I've termed rampant trade thirst, which is people basically saying this roster needs a retool, get these guys off my team, doesn't matter how we get there. I've seen MPJ for Miles Bridges ideas. I've seen this multiple times. This particular one just bothers me a lot. Will, if you could bring up the MPJ trade to the Bulls. I'll be honest, Jake, I wasn't the biggest fan of these particular mock off seasons in your guide. And some of them are like nitpicky, like, and we're going to talk about the nitpicks mostly. But for me personally, I don't think that it's not that I agree with Josh that the core didn't get like a fair shake necessarily with this last season, because I think they contributed to it, if we're being honest. Like, players playing with that level of apathy isn't just on, you know, on the coaches, for example. I would feel better if I didn't feel like a lot of these resulted in another gap year for Nikola Jokic's prime, where I don't think that what we're getting immediately makes us a contender. But I also understand that part of what you're trying to accomplish is sort of creating some more flexibility so that other moves can be made down the line. All right. So I'll ask you to explain your first one here, where you trade MPJ to the Bulls to try to create some depth on this roster.
Yep. So this trade is kind of, what would I say? Probably the thing you hear most from people around like Nuggets media is, oh, we need to break up the Michael Porter contract into multiple playable players. This is kind of one of the deals I identified as possibly doing that. And so Kevin Huerter, Ayo Dosunmu, those guys are probably playing right away. And then you're also taking on some bad money in Patrick Williams.
Yeah, it's pretty bad money.
Yes, it is. And his deal goes another 4 years.
Did you know they gave him a player option?
Yes, unfortunately I did.
Like, what?
But yeah, I think his patience, or I guess the front office's patience with him is worn pretty thin. It was a pretty rough year there for him, and I think they're pretty frustrated with him. And so you're able to get him back, and you get off some bad money in Zeke, and then you're also trading a first-round pick, but getting a second back. So you're getting 2 rotation players back for sending out 1. And maybe if you're a really big Patrick Williams fan, you think, hey, maybe we got a 3rd rotation player eventually. I don't know. I wouldn't count on it, but it's a possibility.
So I agree with you that you're obviously getting at least 2 rotation players back for sending out 1. But let me give you my arguments for not including the 2031 first in this deal. MPJ is the best player in this deal. I don't think anybody can credibly argue that unless they're the biggest Patrick Williams fan on the planet. And I think the 2031 first round pick is very clearly the best asset in the deal as well, right? The future first when Jokic is going to be God knows how old. I don't feel like doing math right now. And who knows where the Nuggets will be at that point. Like, we don't know if Jokic will be here, for example. I do think that the reason you're including the 2031 first in this deal is essentially to salary dump Zeke Najee's contract, because I don't think that giving the Bulls, like, yeah, MPJ has like $7 million more left on his deal than Patrick Williams is, but it's over fewer years. So they just know that money's gonna be expiring sooner, and just they could even move it if they wanted to. So that is my hesitation with particularly including the 2031 first here. Otherwise, like, I get you have the added benefit of adding another shooter with Kevin Huerter, and then you get another ball handler off the bench that can help smooth out some of the issues we've had with these staggered lineups, even with Jokic on the floor. Like, I've been talking about this Russ, Payton, Jokic trio all season long, just like monitoring it through the lineup data, and it's been rough. And part of that is because of the lack of shooting that we have on the roster outside of rookie, basically, Julian Strother, who has his own issues as a young player right now. So I get that, and you again add that depth and just be able to smooth out the rotation a little bit more. Do you want to talk a little bit about in this mock off season, or I'll just have it listed here. So you fill out the depth chart after making this move by trading into the second round to draft center Amari Williams to try to get an actual backup center in the pipeline. We don't have one right now. A lot of people are talking about Deron Holmes. The organization does not see him as a center. Sure, I don't know that he sees himself as a center at the NBA level, and I don't see him as a center at the NBA level. He's actually slightly smaller than Zeke. He's also coming off an Achilles injury, and you don't, want to throw that guy into a situation where he's playing backup center for NBA and at the NBA level in his first year. You also signed Bruce to a taxpayer MLE, and you bring in Mason Plumlee on a minimum contract. In your scenarios, actually, in both of them, this and the next that we're going to talk about, you have Russ, DJ, and Vlatko all being gone in free agency. And then Dario being bought out and stretched, or like waived and stretched, basically. Why do you think Russ won't be back next year? Or do you? Maybe this was just for the purpose of the mock-off season.
I think if I were to put like a percentage odds on it, I think there's probably like 40% chance he's back and 60% that he's not. So it's not that I think he's for sure gone. I think it was mostly just for purposes of these mock off seasons that he wasn't back. I had some others that I cut out where he was back, but I think the main reasoning would be I think he's going to opt out of that player option because if he signs a new minimum deal, he'll get a little bit more money. And I just think I could see the Nuggets moving in a slightly different direction. That's the way I lean. So it's not like there's no way they're going to bring Russ back. I don't think so. It's not that as much as I lean that way, but I wouldn't be surprised if he's back.
Yeah. Just a quick one for anybody that has like super minutial sort of questions that they want to throw into the chat for Jake. Throw those in right now, because I know Jake has a hard out in about 15 minutes. So I want to try to get to the questions that we need you for, and then don't worry for everybody that sent in questions. I will finish all of the mailbag questions after Jake has to go, but I want to get to the ones that we need our CBA expert to answer. Okay, so the next trade that you have in here is a trade of Jamal to the Raptors. Will, if you could pull that one up here. Why don't you explain this one briefly? It's a 3-team deal to try to get this one done. And it's centered around us getting Emmanuel Quickly, basically, as our new lead guard.
Yep. So this one is sort of rebalancing of your salaries, I guess, like you mentioned a little bit earlier. I tried to identify in these reports teams that I think would actually take the Nuggets players And the three that I identified for Jamal were Toronto, Orlando, and Sacramento. I thought those were three teams that you could make an argument that Jamal makes sense for them in different ways for each franchise. And so this one is kind of trying to find like a player who is not as good as Jamal. You're going to look at this deal and it's going to feel like a downgrade, and it probably is a downgrade immediately. But you're hoping that you can bring out the best in a player. And so I think that's kind of what you're hoping here with Quickley. And in addition, this is a way to do it without giving up any draft capital.
That was a big one that I noticed with this deal too. And you get off the Zeke and Dario deals without giving up draft capital. Obviously, you have to give up your second best player. And like you said, it is pretty... I think I don't know how many people would agree that it, or wouldn't agree that it is a downgrade.
Yep. Yeah, for sure. So you have to think of it in a way as we're cleaning up our books. We're getting a guy who is not as good of a player as Jamal, but can maybe develop into a similar type of player. And we're cleaning up our books without giving up that draft capital. So the downgrade from Jamal to Quickley is helping you clean your books. And you're also getting a couple possible rotation players here in Ochai Agbaji and Marcus Smart, who I don't know how much Smart has left in the tank.
Yeah.
Probably not a lot. But I believe he's only got one more year on his deal. So it's, just a short-term thing to try with him. But Quickley's kind of the main piece where if you think there's any chance Jokic can bring out the best in him and he can stay healthy, it probably ends up not looking as terrible in a few years. But, if you're not a believer in that, I can totally understand not wanting this deal at all.
Yeah. And then in this one, you fill out the depth chart by signing Chris Boucher to a taxpayer MLE. Again, Russ, DJ, Vlatko are gone in free agency. And then you sign Jayshawn Tate and Alex Len on minimums. My nitpick with this one here is that I'm going to be honest here. I'd rather have DJ than Alex Len, just straight up. I think DJ is that much better that I'll take the fewer games from him than the any minutes of Alex Len. Yeah, so that was an interesting one, and I think that the point that you made earlier in the show about the way that this approach with trading all these future firsts to trade earlier into these or trade into these drafts to draft young guys that could fill out the roster has we're paying the piper in multiple ways, because it's not just about roster rebalance, but if you wanted to upgrade positions, like if you wanted to upgrade Jamal, or if you wanted to just straight up upgrade from MPJ, whether that is just a better player on a similar contract or a similar caliber player on a better contract, not having that draft capital to do that sort of leads you to a place where you are almost forced into a gap year, another one, if you wanted to retool. And that's the price you pay versus the price being paid being future draft capital, right? So that's an interesting sort of trade-off that they've put they've put themselves into this position that I don't think they necessarily foresaw, which I get it. Everyone thinks their plan's going to work. Right. Okay, so
I told someone recently too, just kind of revolving around that. We were talking about it, and I was like, well, if you took away Strother and Tyson and Pickett, you'd still have that 29 first, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And if you have that 29 first, now you're talking about being able to trade two of them. And now you're talking about hey, maybe we can get Kevin Durant without giving up Jamal Murray. It kind of it doesn't get you into Giannis conversations or anything, but it does get
unless
you
he
into
wants to go. But yeah, I agree.
So.
Okay, so I'm just going through the rest of the questions to make sure we can get to the very Jake specific ones here. Will, if you could pull up the Manny Ramirez trade. We have a question from Manny Ramirez, or Baldhead Slick 41 on Twitter. He says, my thinking is the Nuggets need to take a money ball approach. How do we trade Jamal and MPJ, but recreate their production with cheaper contracts and create depth? So in this one, they're trading Jamal to the Jazz for John Collins and Colin Sexton. Lots of Collins in there. My first thought to this is that I think trying to replace production alone in the game of basketball, which is like a pretty like delicate team sport, is like there has to be a balance there because fit matters so much. Like that's something that we talked about when it came to the playoff roster. The issue wasn't just production. It was like these players being able to know what to do to play off of each other when they've shared the floor. Not to say that there's any particular fit issue with these players. Oh, okay. Jake has a little bit more time, people. So we can take a couple more questions. Fit matters. I think that Collins and Sexton probably fit with Jokic, but my question is whether they fit with AG, especially John Collins. Like, does he come off the bench, or do you see him starting next to AG? Are we going jumbo? So Manny's question is, do the Jazz say yes? And I don't know. So we've gotten some interesting comments from their new GM, Austin Ainge, who was just named GM a couple days ago. Saying that the Jazz won't be tanking next year. But I don't know that like a Jamal Murray is the kind of player that they're targeting. I don't know that he's not the kind of player that they'd be targeting. So do you have any thoughts on that one, Jake?
Yeah, I would probably lean towards Jamal Murray not being the type of player that they would take right now. They have a lot of high things to say about Keontae George. And I think they'd like to see what he can do for another year. Jamal's money being so long-term, I think probably isn't very attractive to a team like the Jazz, where like they're so early in this process of trying to contend now that like if you go and lock yourself into like a big long deal like that, it can get, that can cause a lot of issues. So I don't think Jamal's the type of player they target. In my report, I did have a trade that was Michael Porter there for Collins and Sexton. And I think Collins can play in the starting lineup next to Gordon. Not as good of a shooter as MPJ, but he can make up for some of it with what he can do with the ball in his hands, I think. So, I mean,
I read that and I was kind of like, do I want the ball in John Collins' hands a lot? I don't know.
Probably not.
I mean,
but
yeah.
if you throw him a grenade or something, right, I think he can do a little more with it than Michael Porter can. And so he's a different player than Michael Porter for sure. And if Aaron Gordon takes a big step back next year from beyond the arc, you might be looking at some trouble. So there's some risk there for sure. But yeah, just to kind of go back to the trade that was proposed there, I'd say they'd probably say no for taking on Jamal there to Utah. But Sexton and Collins, definitely gettable. I don't think either of them have super high value, and I think they're both gettable.
I think Ainge just wants to be able to get something for those guys, especially John Collins, who, gosh, it was very soon after I started following this stuff more deeply that I remember Ainge trading for John Collins from the Hawks, and it was like, okay, this is clearly like let's rehab his value and try to flip him for something big, and it's been like a couple of years now, so he's probably like, I just want to get something for this guy, right? Okay, let's go to this question from PR Morphine, who asks, I'd like to know the most advantageous but realistic scenario for Denver to trade Jamal Murray for Jalen Suggs. Isaac Suggs doesn't quite work, but it's close. Quote, we need to get out from under that contract while there's still a positive return on it, even if it's 75 cents on the dollar. I'd like to preface this by saying I do not agree with Patrick here, but I wanted to, give this idea some thought here. I will say I understand being frustrated with Jamal and thinking they won't be able to win another championship with him, especially on his next contract, which kicks in next year. Even if I disagree vehemently with the idea that we should be trying to get 75 cents on the dollar for our second best player. I just think that the drop off from him is steeper than you think when you're not talking about trying to upgrade your sort of second option. And I'm not even talking about it necessarily having to be a guard even. That being said, as an Orlando Magic fan myself, I think Jamal is just about the best possible fit for what the Magic need right now. They've talked about wanting to have proven shot making. And their offense is, very sad. And having somebody that is Jamal's caliber of playmaker, I think could, help with just getting things a bit more connected there. And they won't even have to play faster because Jamal's not going to make them do that. Yeah. So, Will, if you could bring up the Jamal Magic trade that I sort of whipped up trying to answer this question. I have Jamal going to Orlando along with Zeke and Hunter. So in this trade, Denver gets back Jalen Suggs, Cole Anthony, and Goga Bitadze instead of Jonathan Isaac. And Orlando ends up waiving Gary Harris to make the money work. And part of the reason for that is that Orlando has to take $300,000 more back than they give up, which hard caps them at the first apron. So they have to get under that. And waiving Gary Harris actually gets them well below that. So they could just end up re-signing him on a minimum, or Denver could sign him on a minimum and Gary could come home. I think that it's a pretty fair deal if you think that Jamal's contract is that bad, because Orlando ends up getting a guy who was the number 2 on a championship team not too long ago. He's quote unquote playoff proven and fits their needs, like I said, and can scale up or down next to other higher usage creators next to in Franz and Paolo. And he could be their sort of slightly younger Fred VanVleet for what he did with Houston, right? But worse defensively, but a better shot maker. Denver gets worse, but in Patrick's fantasy here, they get off of Jamal's deal and Zeke's and gain a backup center without having to give up a pick. What do you think about this one, Jake?
Yeah, so Suggs for Murray was like one of the very first trades I ever like looked at this summer. Mm-hmm. And I kind of came down to like not including it because I don't like Suggs as a 1-for-1 replacement for Jamal. Yeah. Like, would I want Suggs on the Nuggets? Yes.
Yeah,
like,
absolutely. He could be our Derek White.
Yeah. But you need more of a playmaking point guard than Suggs. Like, I don't think you could put Suggs next to Christian and have like a very healthy offense. I think it would be pretty rough. So I think that trade, like value-wise and stuff, I think it works good. I would say, just speaking like from a Nuggets perspective, I'd be curious what type of three-team deals they could maybe do, where Suggs goes to a third team, Murray goes to Orlando, and Denver gets a more suitable replacement point guard from whatever that third team is. So I think there's definitely like some framework there that makes sense, and that trade you had value-wise makes total sense to me. I would just have concerns about the fit after.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And like we said, a lot of these deals, whether it's a 3-teamer or not, really, because whoever you get from a third team for Jalen Suggs is probably not going to be Jamal's caliber of player, even if they're on a better contract, perhaps. And maybe they could elevate their game next to Jokic. But you're talking about a downgrade in all probabilities in most of these scenarios. And ideally, what you're looking at is like you're competitive enough in the immediate term, and then you have a bit more flexibility to make another move down the line, is what you're sort of hoping for from these deals.
Yeah, and I think this is all probably, I really don't think they're going to trade Jamal, so there's probably not like a lot to this. Yeah. But if they were to trade Jamal, I just don't see them being able to make an upgrade this summer unless you're the type of person that thinks like Zach LaVine is an upgrade, right? Which I think most people would say no.
Well, I don't know. Not right now. There's a lot of people that are very mad at Jamal. So I think you'd find a lot of people that agree, but I don't.
So yeah, probably no upgrades available this summer with Jamal. But yeah, I mean, like this least step down would be like a player like Suggs or a player like Zach LaVine or someone in that caliber.
Yeah. So we have a couple of questions from the chat. Just curious what you both think about Zeke and Vlatko. That in a form of a question.
Well, I
Okay.
can go first because I'll be harsher.
Okay, please.
I don't think Vlatko's an NBA player. Um,
Oh
I
man,
get having him
you
on-
just stabbed CT Fazio in the heart.
I know. I'm sorry. I get having him on the roster for other reasons. Don't think he's an NBA player. Zeke has an outside shot at maybe becoming a rotation player, but I would still doubt it. He's not a good enough screener for his size. Shot can be inconsistent, not a great rebounder. I mean, there's things there that are promising, and that's why I'd probably give him an outside shot at becoming a rotation guy. But if you ask me what way I'm leaning now, I would say sort of an end of bench player that maybe gets used sparingly. So
Yeah. Agreed. Okay, how many 2025 draft picks from Todd Houston could we get if we traded our entire bench, including Russ and Saric, assuming they opt in? Our 2031 unprotected first round pick swaps in so they want to trade our entire bench alongside our 2020 or 2031 pick swaps in 26, 28, and 2030.
well, that is a crazy question.
It is a crazy question, but it's sort of an extreme version of my tinfoil hat salary dump theory where they use a future first to trade into this draft, but they're dumping the entire bench and using all of their future draft capital to trade well into this draft, I guess, just multiple times.
I will say 3 first round picks is what you could get. I think you could get 2 for the 2031 first. And that's
and then those other pick swaps are just not valuable because Jokic will still be a Denver Nugget.
Yeah, and I think you get one first round pick kind of for the combined value of Watson and Strother. Holmes probably not really holding first round value at this point. The swaps aren't worth a first rounder. So yeah, we'll say 3. That's my answer.
Actually, now that you mentioned the combined value of Watson and Strother with the salary dumps, I think you could get 4, but 2 of them would be very like the Brooklyn's worst 2 of the 5 that they own in this draft, and they'd be like, oh yeah, we'll take a flyer on these guys. Zamora asks, Squatch, what is a CBA rule everybody gets wrong, or you're just tired of explaining to people? I love this question.
Probably just sign and trades overall. A lot of people think that you can get a guy via sign and trade, but it's really not the case. You have to stay under the first apron if you're going to do that.
Yes, because if you participate on the receiving end of a sign and trade where you're trying to get the player that is the free agent, you become hard capped at the first apron.
And now there's even rules where if you sign and trade a player away, if you get a player back, now you're hard capped at the second apron.
Yeah.
And
just because they're not letting second apron teams do anything unless it's shedding salary.
And then there's also rules. I don't have to explain this one really. The last time I did was when Jeremy Grant left Denver. But there's a rule that's called base year compensation that comes into play with sign and trades where
I actually talked about that in the Zeke piece, by the way.
Yeah, where the outgoing value is not the same as the actual contract they're signing. So I would just say sign and trades overall. That would be my answer to that one.
Yeah, it's because they don't make sense. I hate the dollar for dollar matching rules, by the way. Like that Orlando Magic trade, I'm like, really? Orlando has to be hard capped at the first apron because they took back $300,000 more in salary. I don't think they should have gotten rid of the buffers. Just like make them small buffers, because it just makes any trade impossible unless you bring in a third team to, take on some additional smaller salary.
Totally agree.
Okay, one last question for you, Jake, before you have to skedaddle. We got a question from Jokic Collector. He says, how much would it cost to buy a second round pick? I don't actually know the answer to this because it depends on where the pick is, right?
Yeah. A lot of times those types of things aren't really like publicized.
Mm-hmm.
how much cash is going back and forth in those
Right.
deals.
They just say cash.
Yep, it says cash
Yeah.
considerations. One of the best tradable pieces of all time, right?
Yeah.
I think so. Nowadays, I think we're around about $6 million is what you can trade every year uh, during the season, and that resets at the beginning of the next cap year and everything. I think like a very low second round pick, we're probably talking about like a couple $1,000,000. Um, so,
So pretty low. You mean like the late 40s and 50s? That
yeah,
low?
probably
Or
50s.
okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
probably
50s.
50s. So, yeah, that's probably be my estimate. If anybody ever finds out, I think back in the day, the Nuggets sold the Rudy Gobert pick for cash considerations, which was a first round pick. Um, I'm not sure if that number was ever publicized, but that would be an interesting one for someone to research if they ever do look at it.
I need to find these things out. No, I love that. All right. Jake, thank you so much for coming on the show. We really appreciate it. We love talking about your off-season guide. Everybody should check it out. It's still relevant all summer long. Jake has a lot of great information in there, and it is very both informative and, just a great, I think, conversation starter. The mock off seasons also include deals that are smaller margin deals and things that we're going to be talking about here all summer. I wanted to focus this show on, a topic of conversation that had been sort of bubbling to the surface more recently, which is just what would a bigger blow up kind of move look like. But we're also going to be talking throughout the summer about what is actually sort of within the realm of possibility, given how, connected Josh seems to be with the current core. So thank you for helping to guide that discussion, Jake.
Yeah.
If you want to direct the people to any of the work that you do, or maybe some of the data stuff that you do that you want people to check out with your company that you work for.
Yeah, I mean, probably the best way to follow my stuff is just on my Twitter/X feed, which is just the Stat Squatch. Most of my stuff will be on there. I am working on kind of a pretty big NBA, CBA database type project.
Ooh, I love it. I love it.
Months in the making, and probably will be many more months in the making. So whenever that one's finally ready to go public, I'll certainly share it, and it'll probably be there on my Twitter feed.
Awesome. Okay, everybody go follow Jake, but thanks a lot, Jake.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys. Good to talk to you.
Awesome. So the next question we got here, and Will, you can chime in on these too.
Yeah.
Question from Denver D. Mark asks, how would you feel about a Desmond Bane trade to Denver? I said, so Desmond had many guards last season. And this was an interesting phenomenon I might dig into for another piece if I just ever decide that I want to write something again. I don't think that Memphis is looking to move him, but he did have a bit of a down year last year. So if they are, it may be a buy low opportunity if you believe in a bounce back from him. He has 4 years left on his deal with no options on money that's similar to MPJ's. So that's probably the deal you'd be looking to make. Personally, I'd probably prefer to keep the powder dry for a bit more of a wing upgrade, because Bane is a wing, but he's a smaller wing, bigger guard kind of guy. But I don't think that this is an unreasonable target at all. Will, how do you feel about Desmond Bane?
Oh, man, I think Desmond Bane's amazing.
Yeah.
I'm
When
just
he's
curious,
good.
how the hell do you get him?
Well, you'd trade MPJ. This is if Memphis was looking to move him, and it would be MPJ out, and Memphis has a bit more flexibility because MPJ only has 2 years left on his deal compared to the 4 with Desmond's. And maybe they see it as not that big of a downgrade if they're well, Jaw's going to have the ball more in his hands more anyway. That's you'd have to, it relies on Memphis sort of looking to, they're the same age, by the way. Desmond's not, I thought he was younger, but they're the same age. I think Desmond's actually older by a couple of months.
Yeah. I
so
mean, I
it's
love
not
him.
Yeah. And both of them, who knows how Memphis assesses his upside. We did see him take more on-ball responsibility during the year that Ja was out with both the suspension and then subsequent injuries. But it also like didn't go well. Like there's a reason that the Grizzlies didn't, win that many games that year. The playmaking, I think, regressed even from where it was that year. But it's, again, like, would that be an upgrade on MPJ? Probably. But is that the kind of player you're going after? I don't think it's an unreasonable target.
Yeah, depends on their outlook and everything for the Grizzlies. I think they could get a lot better for Desmond Bane than MPJ, personally.
Right, I agree with that. That's why you'd have to rely on them sort of not believing that he bounces back from this last season. But they probably do because he's their guy. That's how teams operate these days, right? Okay, our next question here is from Corner Store 64. There's a 3-parter. If CB does want 3 years, $100 million, do you throw him in the MPJ trade for Trey Murphy? And who do we get back? Potential 3-team scenarios. This one is a little bit complicated because I didn't come up with 3-team scenarios for this one. I actually think if Christian actually wants 3 years, $100 million, so like a little over $33 million a year, his time in Denver should be done because that is about a 30% raise on what Jaden McDaniels makes. And I don't think that Christian has been better than Jaden McDaniels. He's not an all defense caliber defender. You could argue he's better on offense in some ways, like transition, but I think Jaden is a little bit more versatile than that. He really took a leap this year. So I'm sort of comping those two players that are sort of fifth options within their systems and have to do sort of dirty work things as well. I do think if you believe in Christian's upside, you want him on a 4-year deal because you want him locked in like longer term, like at least a 4-year deal. You are allowed to sign guys to 5-year deals now, by the way, that are not, even if you don't pay them like the designated rookie max deals that are like for the Jaws and the Desmond Banes of the world, you can sign smaller deals for longer too. I haven't seen a deal like that outside of Oklahoma City, who just signed Aaron Wiggins for like a long-term deal that includes team options and things like that. So curious about if other teams are going to take advantage of that rule. So yeah, if you believe in Christian's upside, you want him on a longer deal than the 3 years, $100 million. And if you don't believe in his upside, he shouldn't be making anywhere near that money. So that deal, I don't think makes sense in either framework. And what you'd want if you don't believe in his upside, where you're like, he's basically what he's going to be, then you probably just give him or want to offer him money that is a slight raise on what Josh Hart is making, for example, because that's still like his NBA comp for me. I think Christian and Josh Hart were pretty much equal players in this last playoffs, which says more about Josh Hart than Christian, because I don't think that Christian was like particularly great in the playoffs, although he had his moments. And Christian's also younger, so he'd make a little bit more than what Josh is making, which is about $20 million a year. Okay, that was a lot of words, but that's how I look at sort of assessing value for these contracts. I don't work in the NBA. I don't work in a front office that is making these decisions every day. All I can do is say, like, okay, who are the guys that operate in similar roles to what this guy is going to be? What do they make? What are some of the mitigating factors like age, durability, things like that can, kind of toggle between or sort of operate within like a buffer around the number that those comparable players are making. Next question from Corner Store is, if we get Trey Murphy and we lose Christian and MPJ, what would be our new starting 5? You're probably sliding Peyton into the starting lineup if you're trading 2 starters and only getting 1 player back. So this is a good question for you, Will, actually. I think that part of the reason that Christian isn't going to be going anywhere this summer is because Peyton would have to slide up into whatever like spot is left open by Christian leaving, unless you've got just like a 1-for-1 guy for Christian. But Christian's not going to be thrown into another deal as like a sweetener, for example. My question is, do you think the fact that Peyton Watson hasn't taken the leap, part of the reason that they're kind of a bit more attached, the team is, to MPJ now? Because if you wanted to trade MPJ, you'd have to go for an upgrade basically at that position because we don't really have another good small forward unless you thought that Peyton Watson could slot into that spot. So the trade ideas for MPJ are a bit more limited because you're looking at a particular position.
Phil Brown said earlier, which I'll kind of package into this, about possibly AG playing 3 since he's shooting better. I don't think that will likely happen just because of his need for that big of a body at the 4. So I don't know that he would play 3. Depends on then who you're playing at 4.
I think I'd be more hesitant because of the defense, honestly.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
I don't want AG having to guard 3s.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
I don't know that any guy you're trading for at the 4 position is going to be able to take on the ability to guard 3s. And not that MPJ is a good, guy like navigating screens all the time and all that, but I don't want AG in that role because he's just better at what he does right now. It's good that he's versatile enough that he can take that on if he gets switched on to a guy and everyone was like, he guarded Jalen Williams well in round 2, and to varying degrees, I agree with that, or to a certain extent, I agree with that. But I don't want him having to do that all the time because that's the roster.
Yeah,
right.
But that's just one idea if you're trying to figure out how to replace MPJ at 3. Is it P1? Yeah. Is it AG?
Right.
Probably not AG. I don't like P1 having to be the starting 3. I think that would be a terrible idea. So whatever
I
trade
think
is
if he'd had a better year, these conversations would feel very different because it wouldn't feel like so much of a downgrade if you went from MPJ to a worse player because that player would just be coming off the bench. And then you probably get something else that helps fill out your rotation. And then Peyton moves up into that starting role. But that's not been the experience with Peyton Watson this season. So I think that's another aspect of why these deals feel a bit more tense is like, this is that much more of a downgrade because of, we haven't gotten that progression that we expected internally from Peyton Watson yet.
Yeah.
Okay. The last question from Corner Store. Very informed questions, I thought. Is it realistic to get Bruce, Chris Boucher, and or Gary Trent Jr. on veteran minimums? Oh, Todd Houston also says, I like us signing Bruce Brown and Chris Boucher. I think no, because those guys are probably at least taxpayer MLE guys. I say at least just to be kind. They're probably just tax MLE guys. I could see... Ironically here, I wrote that Bruce is probably the most likely of the 3 that you'd be able to get on a minimum, but it's only because he likes Denver so much. I could also easily see another team offering Bruce the full MLE, which is a little bit more than Najee Marshall got last summer because he got part of the full MLE. I think Gary Trent Jr. is probably going to get a similar raise to Malik Beasley. So Malik Beasley was basically what Gary Trent Jr. is this year, which was the starting 2 guard for the Bucks for large stretches of the season. Had a great year shooting, and then the Detroit Pistons were like, we'll give you $6 million a year and you don't have to be on a minimum anymore. And I think that's probably what Gary Trent Jr. is going to command a little bit more than the taxpayer MLE. But if he wanted to come to Denver on the taxpayer MLE, I would consider that because I'd love to get some consistent shooting, and David Adelman would like that too.
Yeah, that's like a guy a lot of Nuggets fans wanted to put in that contract exception, but obviously we didn't do that.
Yeah.
We got Dario.
That's my thing is like, I don't think you have to offer all these guys player options to come to Denver, but you can find like a good enough minimum guy that you're like, I really want this guy, but I don't think anyone else is going to offer him more than a minimum. So we can just beat their offer by offering the taxpayer mid-level. And we did that with Dario, to be fair. Nobody else did offer him more than a minimum, and he was almost going to go to Europe. But Calvin flew to Europe, offered him the taxpayer MLE with a player option, and convinced him to come to Denver. And here we are.
Mm-hmm. What do you think of this comment really quick before we get to our last question? Ken Goldman says, Trey Murphy, damaged goods, tore labrum, rotator cuff. Will he be ready for the season? Would it affect his shot?
I wouldn't be worried about his shot because, like, when you're a shooter that's that good, you're working on that all the time, and you're going to be able to come back from that. I do think that the durability question is a real one. I was having a dialogue with someone online that says Christian is already clearly better than Trey Murphy. I disagree with that, but the thing that Christian has on him is durability. And part of these are just like freak accidents that happen. So, and things that could happen to Christian in the future too. But once enough of them build up, you sort of become more, you tend towards more just because of, ligament things. They tend to be re-aggravated. As somebody that's had plenty of joint issues in my life, I can attest to that, even as a non-athlete. But it's just something that you'd have to consider if you wanted to trade Christian for Trey Murphy, is like, we should probably also try to get somebody in that deal that can just eat minutes, that can just be on the floor, right? Because it kind of doesn't matter how good you are if you can't play. And okay, so our last listener question, and I'm fine taking more from the chat if you find any other interesting ones, Will.
Yeah.
From Matthew Duncan, who said, who do you think are the options for the mid-level exception? So we're going to have only the taxpayer mid-level exception in all probability this summer, which is about half the full mid-level exception. So like I said earlier, I think Bruce Brown is probably somebody that they could get on the taxpayer mid-level. One of the dynamics I'm looking for this summer is if Bruce wants to come here, he probably wants the tax mid-level and not just a vet minimum. So does that mean that we just don't have the option of giving the tax mid-level to somebody else should they become an option for Denver? Also, like, who knows? Like, again, Bruce may not end up coming back here, and it could be for this reason. Like, he just gets offered a tax mid-level or a full mid-level somewhere else. Bruce, Gary Trent Jr., Chris Boucher is an option. This free agent class is actually not that intriguing to me, which is why I'm more interested generally in some smaller trade ideas. But it's just the nature of the new CBA is the free agent classes aren't really that great outside of usually like a couple guys at the top that are going to be out of our range. So
yeah. Okay, so a couple more questions from the chat and then we'll be done. Thank you guys if you're still here for listening. And after Jake has gone and hanging out, we love you guys. From Red and Whites, if you're still in the chat, do you think there's a chance that Cancar, Saric, DeAndre Jordan, and Westbrook are not on the Nuggets come July? That would be 4 roster spots. I think there's a chance DeAndre Jordan and Westbrook won't be, but I'll be surprised if Westbrook isn't on some level. And then I'd be very surprised if Saric wasn't on the team, just because he will probably
I think he's taking a player option.
Yeah, he's going to opt in. And then
$5 billion.
At that point, you're going to be working on a trade, and that might take some time. And so we'll see. I mean, there's a chance, but I think Vlatko's probably not going to be on the team. But it's going to be
I'm not so sure about it, honestly, because if you're telling Jokic our whole plan is internal development anyway, and then you take away his best friend, and he's just like, so I'm supposed to just be miserable here? I think Jokic becomes extension eligible, by the way, after the NBA finals are over. I want to know at what point in the summer he signs his extension. I think he's going to sign it either way. I don't think he's going to wait that long. But look, he is in Serbia right now. His Ben 10s are going to have to fly there. I don't know that Jokic wants to docu-sign his further commitment to this franchise that, keeps putting children around him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the buyout was definitely an option. That's definitely a desperate type of thing, but it's a reasonable option to consider. And I would love to know what a new GM would think about doing something like that. That'd be something I feel like Kroenke would have more like say over. He'd be like, okay, this is what we're going to do. But
yeah, I think Kroenke has a lot of say in a lot of things right now. And part of installing Ben Tenzer probably, hopefully within the next week, because one of the things someone pointed out to me yesterday is that KD is probably going to be traded before the NBA draft. And, you know, theoretically, I'm not saying this will happen, probably won't. If he came to Denver's people and was like, I want to go to Denver, we don't have a general manager to like work out that, you know, those details and like try to make that happen. If like, even if he doesn't say Denver, if Denver's just like on his short list, like we need somebody to be like advocating for that if that's something that they would be interested in. And look, it's not like nobody's working there. Like there are people working in the front office. We still have our assistant GM, Tommy Balcedes, and Ben Tenser is acting general manager right now, interim general manager. So he could do those things, but it's kind of an unstable situation if you haven't named who the guy is, which isn't particularly attractive to free agents either. So I'm kind of annoyed that they haven't just named the general manager yet, even if it is just going to be Ben Tenser. We shall see.
Todd brought up, I don't know how to say this individual's name.
Markovich?
But yes.
We'll just say
Markovich being mocked between picks 35-46. Intriguing Serbian, 6'11", forward, 3-point sharpshooter. Well,
to replace Vlatko.
Got to get a pick.
It'd be really funny if we just brought in another Serbian to replace Vlatko and Jokic just hated him.
It would be cool to get another Serbian connection for Jokic, and I like the sound of a 6'11" 3-point shooter. Yeah, you and Jake had a good discussion on that earlier, the different skills that we want, and I'm sure CT Fazio will have some draft ideas. Todd's been bringing up lots of interesting names about who we could potentially draft throughout the show. So yeah, we'll look to see who we could maybe add if they even trade for more picks or if they're just getting late second picks. We'll see.